Sawako, thank you very much, and a big yokoso, a very, very big welcome to all of you here in Japan. I'm sure you know every speaker starts out with this, but you know, it's a beautiful day, and you know, I hope we're going to have a little bit of fun, you know, with this session here. Very quickly, I myself, I'm originally from Germany. I studied mathematics in the United States, and then got stuck here in Japan. I've been here since 1985. I came originally as a researcher and then got sucked into Japanese politics. I was one of the first non-Japanese who worked as an aide to a member of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. And then ended up in finance. It was the bubble economy, and you know, JP Morgan was looking for a chief economist, and so I've been in finance really for the last 30 years or so. I'm now quasi-retired. I serve on several boards, including the Okinawa Institute for Science and Technology, which is a new research initiative, new research university that Japan set up. And I'm happy to say that we just won a Nobel Prize, which is very, very nice, you know, to do that. But, you know, this is not about me. This is about rocking the boat. You know, foreigners who've been in Japan for over 30 years, we don't rock the boats anymore. Maybe we did at the beginning, but here you go. And rather than me introducing her, since you are an aspiring national leader, an aspiring politician, I just give the stage to you to put yourself on the stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Jesper, and thank you very much, everybody, for having me. Thank you, Asia Society, for having me as well. Perhaps I'll start a little bit by introducing myself and then talking a little bit about what my journey has been like as sort of a candidate you might not expect to see running in Japan, especially with the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, which has been historically criticized to be, you know, the spearheading, steering ship of Japanese conservatism and nationalism, and protecting the status quo. So, you know, I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit about my journey, what got me into politics, but also what came before and what drives me and what that means for democracy in Asia overall as we see, you know, as we speak in the global context of shrinking space for human rights, shrinking space for civil society, rise of authoritarianism, populism, nationalism all over the world, and the pushback we're seeing recently on this as well, throughout the continent and also throughout the world. So, my name is Arfiya Eri. I am from Kitakyushu, Fukuoka, which is the northern tip of the most southern island of the four main islands in Japan. I am of Uyghur and Uzbek heritage. My father is Uyghur. My mother is Uzbek. They came to Japan in the mid-'80s, and then I was born here in 1988. In Japan, this was something I actually had to talk about a lot during elections because it's not widely known even to the Japanese people. But in our country, if you're born here, you're not automatically given Japanese citizenship. If you are born here and you are raised here and you mature at the age of 20, you are given the opportunity to apply for a citizenship. And you are given sort of priority if you're born and raised here. But up until then, unless your parents naturalized to Japan, you do not get to be a Japanese citizen, even if you might be born and raised here through and through, or if you might be born here and, you know, had lived abroad after that. So I was born here, and luckily for me, my parents decided to naturalize when I was in 5th grade, so I got to naturalize with them. And when they decided to become Japanese, they sort of asked me, you know, like, we're going to become Japanese now, is that okay with you? And for me, it was a really weird question because I looked at my father and I said, are we not Japanese, Dad? And he said, no. And I thought, you know, I was born here, raised here. I had only lived in Kitakyushu up until then. We had visited the Uyghur region where my grandparents lived, but I always sort of saw it as a foreign homecoming, you know, and not necessarily visiting home per se. My home was always Fukuoka. And so it was so weird. I was like, okay, well, I'm already Japanese, so you guys decide what you want to be. And so my father thought, okay, well, then no problems. And he also asked me, so your name is right now Central Asian. Arfiya is a Central Asian name. Do you want a Japanese name? And that was really weird for me, too. And I looked at my father and I said, what Japanese name would I have? And he said, I don't know, maybe Arisa or, Ayako, something similar to your original name. And I was like, Arfiya is a Japanese name. And my father was like, okay, well, then we'll keep Arfiya. And so there we were. We became Japanese. After we naturalized, my father's job actually took us to China. So from 5th grade all the way to high school graduation, I spent my time in Shanghai and Guangzhou. I attended American schools there, which is why I talk like an American. And my exposure to Shanghai and Guangzhou, actually living in Chinese cities, gave me the opportunity to go to the Uyghur region more often. Because we were already in China, it was much easier for us to, of course, travel domestically. And as soon as I was a teenager, I think around 13, I started going to the region very, very often. So much of my teenage life was actually spent in Urumqi. And much of my identity and my drive for democracy and justice not only comes from being from a southern city of Japan, well known for its quest for its own identity and differentiation and friendliness and hospitality and diversity, but also comes from a lot of experiences I've had in Urumqi as a teenager and sharing much of the struggles we've had as millennials, as Uyghur millennials, alongside friends I had made there. After graduating from high school in Guangzhou, I went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, then went to grad school there as well. I decided to focus on modern Uyghur identities and did a lot of field work back in Urumqi as well. I sort of stumbled upon it by a matter of luck. I didn't really intend to study the Uyghurs. But once I got to the United States and started looking at literature on the region and on Central Asia and China as a whole, it became quite apparent to me that we were significantly lacking a voice from, an on-the-ground voice, and voice from academics and journalists who can actually go and talk to Uyghur people, who can actually build trust with them, who can actually understand what the risks might be for this population to speak up, and how they might be able to package it to protect the people there, but also to be a voice for people who don't necessarily have that kind of voice. So I pursued that and studied modern consumer culture in Urumqi. And what I found was that back in late 2000s, this was before the 2009 demonstrations in Urumqi, back in the late 2000s, we were seeing the significant rise of Uyghur identity and nationalism expressed through consumption in the region. So in Urumqi, you were seeing this natural segregation of Han Chinese folks and other Turkic people within the city, for one. And this wasn't necessarily government-induced. It was much more so because with the increasing development in China and the rising economic and purchasing power that people had, both Han and Uyghur, they were finally able to choose what they were going to consume. And this was very interesting to see what the Uyghurs were then choosing to consume, what they were choosing as their lifestyles. And it wasn't a political show of their identity, but it was definitely an economic one. Uyghurs would definitely choose to live in a Uyghur neighborhood, where Han Chinese families would consider less desirable. Uyghurs would consider desirable. This was a very interesting phenomenon to see. And also, I would go to Uyghur clubs and sort of see what kind of music they were dancing to. And, in 3 hours, 4 hours of being in the same club, you would never hear a Mandarin song. You would hear Turkish songs, you would hear Uzbek songs, you would hear, Kazakh songs and Russian songs, and of course, Uyghur songs, but not Chinese ones. I found that to be really, really interesting. And then you would walk into supermarkets in Uyghur neighborhoods and you would see candies from Turkey and candies from China and candies locally made in the region. And people often rush towards Turkish ones or locally made ones and not Chinese packaging. And I found that to be really also interesting. So I interviewed. folks, and I said, well, why do you buy Turkish candies? And their answer was, it's not because they were boycotting Chinese candies. It was because Uyghur language is so similar to Turkish, they could read the packaging. Same with Central Asian products. They could read the packaging. And so, if a shampoo box said shampoo, Uyghurs could walk in and say, oh, this is shampoo. So I'll buy it, right? And so there was this trust being built on cultural similarities towards the region's west as opposed to the region's east, which I thought was really interesting to see. After doing this study, I happened to apply for the Bank of Japan, the central bank. Out of also luck, I didn't really intend to work for the BOJ, but I was looking for a job, and we were in a financial crisis, and a lot of Japanese companies were in Boston trying to hire bilingual Japanese folks. I was like, okay, I'm a bilingual Japanese folk, maybe I'll give that a shot. And the Bank of Japan found this study very interesting. And so they said, okay, well, we've never hired someone like you before, and I also was horrible in econ, and you have horrible econ grades, but we can teach you. So I entered the Bank of Japan as one of, I guess, their first openly non-ethnic Japanese woman on a career track, and spent around 4 years there. Then applied to work for the United Nations as a junior professional officer with support from the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I then, ended up having a 5-year career at the UN, working on overall management of the United Nations, working on political affairs, especially as a political affairs officer for South Asia, looking at democracies in South Asia, human rights also in the region as well. Then moved on to the Department of Safety and Security, where most recently we worked quite closely on the Ukraine crisis and ensuring that humanitarian support, human rights support, and refugee support necessary for the conflict is protected in the region. So up until this May, I was a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary General for Safety and Security at the UN. And in April, I had the opportunity to come back to Japan because I was working too much. So I had a doctor's note saying, well, you're working too much, you need to take a month off. And so I thought, maybe I'll come home. And I was in touch with Minister Kono Taro, who is also a Joshan alum, regarding my frustrations, my increasing frustrations towards lack of diversity in Japanese democracy. It was triggered slightly a year before that, when we had a gubernatorial race in Fukuoka. I'm not sure if you remember this, Jesper, or Japanese folks, you might remember this. We had a sudden gubernatorial race. And what really shocked me, looking at it from New York, having covered democracies in Asia, was that a lot of the candidates that were being sort of advertised as most likely candidates or recommended candidates were all male, of certain generation, and of certain career and economic background. Typical for Japan, but I thought not so for Fukuoka. The city I'm from is incredibly diverse. We have a lot of women who are corporate leaders, government leaders, and we also have a very vibrant young population. And yet, if this is the candidacy we see in Fukuoka, what is the rest of the country like? And so I did a little bit of research. And I found, so this is the most updated numbers, currently 9.9% of our lower house is women. 9.9%. And 25.8% of our upper house is women. The average age of lawmakers in Japan is 57. I thought that was shocking. Here we are sitting at the UN talking about SDGs and democracies and democratization of, I suppose, developing economies. And yet I come from an advanced economy and supposedly a country with mature democracy where most of our population is not represented. I thought that was wrong. And so I wrote to Minister Kono. We had been connected through the United States and Japan Leadership Program, another program that some of us in this room are a part of. And I said, I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm from Fukuoka and I'm really, really angry. So he said, well, okay, let's talk. And so when I was back here in April, I got the opportunity to go to the Liberal Democratic Party and sort of talk about how frustrated I was. And then conversation started from there. And I got to meet former Prime Minister Taro Aso, who is also from Fukuoka. And after that meeting, Minister Kono and I got a phone call saying, it was April, we got a phone call saying, well, we have an upper house election coming up in July. Would she be interested in going through the nomination process? And so I looked at Minister Kono and I said, that's in 2 months. What am I going to do? Am I going to quit my job and come here? And he said, yeah, I guess that's what you're going to do. And so I said, okay, I need some time to think about it. So I took 24 hours to think about it. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe I might not win, but we might be able to start a conversation here. And we might be able to have a platform for populations that haven't been represented before in Japan to be represented. So I went through the nomination process, and I got the nomination, left the UN in mid-May, attended a press conference in late May. My campaigning, unofficial campaigning started early June. Official campaigning started mid-June. And the elections was 10th of July. And within 6 weeks, in 6 weeks, we were able to get around 55,000 individual votes to my name. And in Japan, when you vote, you don't circle the names, you have to write the name of the candidate. So it meant that 55,000 people remembered my name, this very difficult foreign name, which 6-year-old Arfiya will tell you is definitely Japanese, and wrote my name. Alongside myself, there were 3 other women who were nominated at the same time by the LDP. And this was LDP's way of saying, okay, we heard you. We've heard a lot of criticisms about not having enough women candidates. So here we have 4 women who we will nominate 6 weeks before the elections. And we wish them luck. And they all have careers. They're all young. You guys go vote. So all of us actually did quite well. And out of those 4, I got the most votes. And there were a lot of concerns about, like, what does this mean for Japan? When did she naturalize? There was a lot of hate speech against me online, and I think we have to touch on that. There was a lot of sort of like, well, she's not really Japanese, or when did she become Japanese? Is she a spy? And it concerned me a lot, but after the elections, one thing my mother said to me really had an impact. She said, you were so concerned about racism and racist hate speech against you and these sort of comments about you saw online. But you have to be assured that that's a very loud minority, because out of the 4 young women who were nominated at the same time, you are the only person of naturalized Japanese heritage, and you got the most votes. So where are the racists, right? And that gave me a lot of comfort. I think there's a lot that we talk about within Japan and outside of Japan as regards Japan's lack of diversity, or our homogeneity, or our perceived lack of ability to come to the 21st century. But through my campaigning, through my work, I learned that a lot of these things are imagined and constructed through our imagination. If we are able to present to the public options that are different from traditional ones, we already have a public that welcomes it. We already have a public that supports it. And I think it's much more about daring to break that barrier and daring to lead, as opposed to waiting for some imaginary door to open for all of us. I think doors are for all of us to open. So within my campaigning, I also learned that Japan is very much part of our global community and very much in the 21st century. And we actually share pretty much similar concerns as the rest of the world. I ran in the context of, as mentioned earlier, globally shrinking space for human rights, civil society, and democracy. This is something we're seeing throughout Asia. I was deeply disappointed by the amount of hate speech that flew all over the internet space, especially Twitter, without any regulation. without any discussion, without any accountability for who was doing this or why. And it was defended in the name of free speech. So I think within Japan and also throughout Asia, we need to be having more discussions about free speech, but also responsibility of speech. That was one. I also saw polarization of discourse, not least due to the rise of social media. And we see that throughout the world. And of course, rise of authoritarianism, populism, strongman leaders, nationalism. Some in Japan would argue that LDP might be responsible for this. But we do live in an era where populism is welcomed. Social media posts that are not based on facts are welcomed, and they have sort of this power to walk on their own. What are we going to do about that? And of course, again, rise of hate speech and dehumanization, especially against minorities. My work in the Uyghur region has taught me at an early age that in order to violate other people's human rights, we need to dehumanize them first. Because humans are naturally kind. We are actually incapable of hurting other people who we see as human. So in order for us to harm others, or in a greater context, in order for a government to target a specific group, they need to be dehumanized first. And one of the most effective ways of dehumanization is hate speech. The fact that this is allowed still in Japan is of a great concern for me. And as I close this talk and hopefully transition to a more in-depth discussion as well, I cannot help but refer to the current democracy movement in China, which was stirred by 44 people who died alive in a fire in Urumqi because they were not able to leave their homes due to their zero-COVID policy. This fire happened along the neighborhood I hung out a lot in as a teenager. I remember that building. I remember that neighborhood. It's right next to a Grand Bazaar, at the center, at the heart of Uyghur life in Urumqi. It is also surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of Uyghur family homes. Folks I interviewed in late 2000s, folks who chose with their economic power to live in a Uyghur neighborhood, and folks who paid that price for living in a Uyghur neighborhood, when during a zero-COVID policy, the entire neighborhood was stuck in their homes, not able to go out, some even suffering from hunger, some even suffering from lack of access to medical care. It is not a surprise for me that what is happening in China today was stirred by a situation in Urumqi. This is something that the city has been seeing for a very long time, and yet the city remains resilient. Everything that I am today, I owe to Urumqi. And so I cannot leave this talk without dedicating this talk to those we've lost. And I invite you all to a moment of silence for the victims lost, and also prayer for human rights and democracy all over the world. I thank you. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for this very, compassionate talk, for these, insights into, the genesis of your convictions, and congratulations for like you said, actually fighting the fight. I'm a little bit lost in terms of where do we connect from here on, but maybe a good segue would be you talk to me about the LDP, right? I mean, you probably know that the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan is actually the most successful political party in a democracy. They have consistently ruled this country with, the exception of just 2.5 years or 3 years, in the late 90s, early noughts, right? An incredible bastion of power. And right now, they actually rule with a 2/3 majority in parliament. And it's quite incredible. Prime Minister Kishida, whether you like him or not, we can always discuss. In the last session of Parliament, 100% of the bills, of the legislative proposals, were actually turned into law. Do you know what the ratio is in the United States now? It's less than 40%, right? So in terms of, a democracy that works, right? A parliamentary democracy where the members of parliament are actually elected. In the Japanese system, Japan actually functions extremely well. They do get things done, right? Let me give you another example. In my field of the economy and investing, it took Prime Minister Kishida exactly 11 minutes of debate in his parliament earlier this year when inflation came up and the price of gasoline destroyed the purchasing power of the people. In exactly 11 minutes, they decided that the price for gasoline at the pump was basically going to be fixed, right? So it's very, very interesting, to actually see that here, promoting Japan or showing Japan as a democracy that works, that does actually get things done, is actually perfectly possible, right? And it is democratically elected. And I think, and I'm playing devil's advocates now, again, we can always, be angry at the old men. And I was fascinated, by the way, by what you said. The average age of a Japanese politician is 56.
57.
It's 55. It doesn't really, we don't need to get into an argument here. What's the average age in Japan? The average age is now 39, right? In fact, one of the reasons why I love staying in Japan is that everybody else gets older faster than I do. It's fantastic, right? What's the average age? Sorry, what's the average age in? The average age in Japan is now 40. The average age in Japan is now 48. The average age in the United States is 38, right? What's the average age of an American politician at the Senate or congressional level? Correct, it's 64, right? In fact, America, you talked about, from a UN perspective, fighting for democracy, who represents whom. Actually America is now, in terms of the age discrepancy, is actually the big standout, where basically, you've got very old people, not even baby boomers, maybe people who even knew Elvis Presley, right? Running the country. While here, actually, there's been something. But talk to me a little bit about sort of, you've obviously got a personal relationship with, Mr. Kono, right? Minister Kono. But your interactions with the LDP. What were some of the positive surprises? What were some of the negative surprises?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Jesper. There were so many positive surprises. I think one is that because LDP is a party that, I think it's a self-proclaimed party that is sort of a protector, per se, of Japanese traditions and Japanese civilization, right? There is that sense of Japanese community within the LDP. And because LDP has been in power for so long, we've now become this overarching umbrella party for all kinds of thoughts. So we have really conservative people within the party, and we also have moderates, and we have some who lean quite on the liberal end. But what was incredibly pleasantly surprising for me was this whole sense of community, for one, regardless of what ideas you have, what thoughts you have. We're all here for Japanese liberalism and democracy, right? Freedom and democracy. So that appreciation for free thought was one, and also appreciation for pulling young people up. I was definitely pulled up by older, more powerful LDP politicians who definitely did not benefit from supporting me. But they did so because they definitely believe that we need a younger voice, we need a woman's voice, and we need a diverse voice. And this sort of, because this party has been in power so long, this sort of strategic overarching paradigm that they have of Japan, and their sort of willingness to use their privileges to pull others who don't have those privileges, was honestly an example in I'd like to see in any other advanced economy. I've never seen it anywhere else, honestly. This level of folks with privilege is incredibly being willing to pull up those who don't have the same privileges they do. I think what was disappointing was, honestly, lack of attention towards how much our discourse has polarized over time, especially due to the rise of social media, but also because we've had one ruling party for such a long time, and how violent that conversation can be. And there doesn't seem to be much of a resolution presented from the LDP for this, because it, in a way, benefits those in privilege and those in power. But because it is a party with, appreciation for free thought, I think it's certainly something we could bring forward within the party with more voice and with more, with increased representation of younger folks and folks of, minority backgrounds.
Just, I don't know how many of you know a little bit about the Japanese history, but this is an incredible country. It used to be a country where 8 families controlled 80% of the economy. These were the famous Zaibatsu families, the Mitsubishi, the Sumitomo, the Mitsui, right? There were 8 families that controlled, 80% of the assets, 80% of employment, 80% of GDP, right? Quite incredible. It was, in a way, sort of Karl Marx's dream, of sort of come true of conglomerate capitalism, if you're familiar with this sort of terminology, right? And then, of course, the Americans came in, right, after they defeated Japan, in the war. And the Americans, which is why we love Americans, right? They basically set up a system that made it impossible, or sought to make it impossible, for this sort of concentration of power, this sort of concentration of wealth to ever happen again. And so what did they do? The first thing they did is land reform, right? So he or she who works the land actually gets the land. Massive, redistribution of wealth, as you can imagine, right? And then they had a professor from Chicago University, Professor Shoup, who designed a tax system that eradicates all wealth over 2 generations. Japan has a fevishly high, inheritance tax rate. Japan has a very, very high income tax rate. And it's quite interesting, even, over the last 10 years, Prime Minister Abe in Japan, he's the only leader of a G7 country where the top marginal income tax rate has actually gone up, right? It used to be 45%. And, Prime Minister Abe in 2014 actually pushed it up to 55%. It's quite interesting, right? So there is this spirit, right, of democracy, so to speak. The spirit of empowerment, is actually quite a strong one, right? And, the Japanese government, the LDP, is not afraid to make uncomfortable policies, right? Even if they hurt Elon Musk, even if they hurt, right, the rich, as it were, right? By the way, it's kind of ironic, right? Because, you know, America started out in Japan to make a concentration of power, such as we had here in Japan with the 8 families, make that impossible. That was the system that was designed. While the reality, of course, is that now we are in the United States, right, where the top 1%, you know, control almost 2/3 of all the assets, right? It's kind of a little bit of an irony there, right? If you think about it, right? So it's quite interesting to actually see, you know, exactly as you point out, right? I mean, one of the reasons why the LDP has been able to stay in power is because, you know, there is actually within the LDP there is various factions. Right? And these factions pursue different policies there, right? So that's something that's sort of there. Now, talk to me a little bit about, you know, being attacked as a politician is sort of par for the course, right? So when I, you know, got the job working as an aide to a member of parliament, he was actually the first, you know, Japanese who admitted that he's of Korean heritage. And that was a big thing at the time, again, for the LDP to actually sponsor somebody who openly admitted, right, that he's of Korean heritage. And there were many battles, right, many smear campaigns, et cetera, but, you know, you personally talk to me a little bit about, you know, sort of, you know, what the hate speech, right, some of the issues, you know, that you were criticized for.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of it was... It came as a shock that someone like me would be nominated by the LDP. You know, you see folks with my profile in other opposition parties, and so there was a lot of critique there. But, you know, why isn't she running with the opposition party? Why is she running with this majority party that advocates for male domination? Essentially, was the criticism. But, you know, in reality, you know, I mean, yes, in numbers, LDP is definitely majority male, but it's not, you know, trying to advocate for male domination. But structurally, I think that is the image that we've been given. And so there was a lot of that, is why is she running with the LDP? Why is she running with the Conservative Party? And my answer to that is, you know, our politics is not based on identities, right? It's based on thoughts. And my thoughts and policies I believe in for Japan align the best with LDP. And so regardless of what my ethnic background is, I should be running with a party with, you know, policies that, with policies that align with the ones I advocate for. That's one. Another, I think, was intersectionality of being a young woman and also a minority. I was the youngest candidate endorsed by the LDP this time, and so I think there's a lot there about, you know, being a 33-year-old woman and discomfort that creates within a discourse that is that is overly dominated by men of a certain age. And I think there's also a bit of a surprise. I was never a public figure, and so I just came out of nowhere. And I think in Japan we have a culture that appreciates long-term relationships. And I haven't had a long-term relationship with the Japanese public, per se. And so, you know, just this random candidate coming out of nowhere was, I think, also, there was a surprise factor to that. And I definitely see it. You know, 6 months after the campaigning, there's a lot less hate speech against me online. Maybe because I'm not a candidate anymore, that's one. But I think also because they're getting used to my persona and the fact that this person exists and they're real and they're not dangerous, right? So I think there's a very Japanese aspect to that too, where, you know, we're a bit scared of what we don't know in the beginning. We all are as humans, but in our country very much so. But once we accept something, we do accept it very much entirely. And I think because of this, Japan has such high potential for diversity and inclusion. I think if we're able to tap into this Japanese hospitality and Japanese generosity to accept something in its totality, when we do, I think we have such good basis for a vibrant diversity and inclusion going forward in the long term.
Just a again, by sort of a little bit of background, basically, you know, when you look at the national politicians here, you've got effectively sort of three groups, right? And the first group is by far the dominant group, which is sort of generations and generations of politicians, right? It's almost like the craftsmen, you know. It's like, you know, you've probably, some of you saw the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi, right? That you've got the craftsman who perfects, and then the son takes over, and then, you know, it sort of goes on. That's sort of the majority. And then the second one is basically people who are some sort of, you know, public persona, right? You know, if you win an Olympic gold medal, for example, you've got a pretty good chance, right, of you know, making it to become a politician. And then, you know, the third element is really people who have worked their way up, right, from local politics, right? Japan has 47 prefectures, Japan has lots of town halls, et cetera, working their way up, right? And this particularly, I think, over the last, you know, decade or so, that's a very positive movement where you actually see that people, you know, have, you know, left their job in the private sector, you know, run for governor, you know, in a local prefecture, and then make it up, you know, to the national stage, right? And, you know, now, you know, you're building your persona, right? When you now sort of prepare for the next election, I assume you're going to run again.
We're not sure about that yet.
This is a very royal. We are not sure. I hope. Well, you should be running. But you know, talk to me a little bit about your interaction, you know, with the voters, with the peoples. You said that there is an openness. Obviously, the numbers, more than 50,000 votes, right? They do speak for themselves, right? There is a strong base there, right? The Japanese society is actually much more open and is actually very interested in not following just cliches, but actually listening to reason and to rationality. So where does your ambition come now?
Going forward?
Going forward, yeah.
That's a really good question. And to follow up on, you know, the three personas that usually are in Japanese politics, I'm none of those things. I don't come from a political family. I was not famous before. I was just a, you know, normal UN officer doing her job, minding her business in New York, not even here, you know. And what was your third one? The local politics. I wasn't even in local politics, right? So it's been a great challenge to open that door, but a great privilege as well. And to build on our discussion on hate speech too, you know, there was a lot of hate speech online, but whenever I went to meet people on the ground, on my campaign trail, never did I feel not accepted. There never was any kind of discriminatory remarks or racist remarks or violence. I always felt safe and welcome. And people genuinely listened to what I had to say. And frankly, you know, when we looked at statistics of votes, because I ran as a national candidate, so everybody in Japan could vote for me. And so you can see, you know, which regions, you know, voted for you the most. Places I went to in person, I had the highest votes. And so once people met me and heard me, they wanted to vote for me, right? And so I think this says a lot about breaking down the barriers, this imagined barriers that we have about political personas and typical politicians that we see in Japan. I think it's much more about, you know, how do we raise more people and more diverse range of candidates to the stage, and how we bring different opinions forward and how we make sure that different people are represented. And I think once again those options are presented, it is very much likely that voters will vote for those people. And they do very much welcome a different opinion. So with that, I think, you know, in the next few years that I have, we probably won't have elections for a while. And politics is, I think, one means to an end. I think that there are many other ways in which we could push this kind of conversation forward. So I do intend to remain in the Japanese public discourse on diversity, on inclusion, on human rights, on democracy, and I'll see where that takes me. You know,
well, we got to talk, you know, but it is very interesting. I mean, Japan is a very male-dominated society traditionally, right? If you just look at the way the language is structured, right? There's a different. I mean, she speaks a different Japanese than I do, you know. But that's because my Japanese, anyway, never mind. You know, and Daisuke does, right? No, but, you know, so you've got this tradition, you've got this heritage, et cetera, et cetera. But, I mean, Japan is also, you know, there's some remarkable success stories, right? You know, the first, you know, female entrepreneur billionaire is actually a Japanese woman. Nobody knows about this, right? It's Namba-san, right? Who, you know, worked at McKinsey and then set up effectively, you know, what is DNA? I forget. It's like an internet company, a gaming company, right? And she owns a baseball team now. She is the vice chair of the Keidan-ren, which is the big business lobby. And like I said, she was the first female, you know, self-made billionaire entrepreneur, you know, particularly in the tech area, right? Which is really quite remarkable. Japan is also very fluid. When you look at the Forbes rankings, right, of the wealthiest 20 people, right, you find that compared to the United States, right, Japan actually has a higher degree of mobility, right, than, you know, the United States, than many of the other countries. So it's quite interesting, you know, there's like you said, there's a narrative out there, right, and then there is a reality, and the reality is actually much, much more open to a, you know, to somebody who wants to challenge, somebody who does bring new ideas onto the table. Let me ask a different question, right? You know, when you look at Japan, right, and let's say that you are now a member of parliament, right? What are the 2 or 3 things, you know, for the, you know, to improve Japan's image in the world, number one? And number 2, to actually improve Japan itself, right? Because it is quite interesting. You're visiting a country that is remarkable. You know what is remarkable? Disposable income. Okay, so that's the stuff that the people actually take home after paying taxes and their Social Security contribution. Disposable income today is where it was in 1994. In America, just, you know, I assume, you know, in America, in 1994, disposable income was about $6 trillion. Today, it's $19 trillion. So a remarkable thing, you know, that has happened. Japan has flatlined, but the unemployment rate never went above 4%. Right? So it's a remarkable stability, but there's a lack of performance. In particular, there's a lack of wealth creation, you know, of income creation that actually takes place. So, you know, if you can sort of focus a little bit on, number 1, to improve Japan's image, right? But then number 2, to really roll up your sleeves. And so here are the 3 or 4 things that Japan ought to be doing in order to actually get the economy going, to actually become globally competitive again.
No, great questions. I think if I had the answer to those questions, I could be prime minister tomorrow. But I think one, you know, improving Japan's image around the world was actually one of my platforms running for office. I advocated for Japan that is, you know, stronger on democracy and democratic principles. As we see this impending threat on international rule-based order, I find it paramount that Japan, as the strongest democratic economy in Asia, takes that responsibility confidently and authoritatively and speak for democracy throughout Asia. I think that is what differentiates us, and I think we've been a bit hesitant about that. But what makes Japan so unique within strong Asian economies is that we are the strongest economic power and the most mature democracy. And we also have a seat, we're the only Asian nation with a seat in the G7. We're the only non-Christianity based nation with a seat in the G7. And we also, as an Asian nation, we also have channels of dialogue and conversation with countries that Western democracies don't necessarily have, right? We have a very good relationship with Myanmar. We have a historical relationship with Iran. We also have very good diplomatic relations with Middle Eastern states. There is so much that Japan can do as a bridge builder across the world. And as we see, again, in the context of polarization and, these threats, I feel like a broken record, but, within the context of the world today, there's so much that Japan can do. And I think there's so much that the world wants Japan to do as a trusted leader that is a little different from Western democracies. And I think that's something we really have to push forward. Stronger stance on human rights within Japan and across the world. And continued assistance to sustainable development across the globe. I think we do that really, really well, and I think it's a backbone of Japanese soft power around the world. And I think we can do a better job about being much more open and transparent and proud about that. We don't talk about it. We should, So those are some of the things. I think when it comes to economics, when I entered the Bank of Japan, I told my supervisors, we've been in recession since I was born, and they were shocked. Because they remember the days in the 80s where, we had a bubble economy and they had bonuses of millions of dollars. And, I entered the Bank of Japan right after the northeastern earthquake, where we had significant cuts in our bonuses to compensate for reconstruction. And so, my first bonus was, I think, a few $100s. And I was telling my supervisors, we only get a few $100. You guys got, a few thousand. And they were shocked. But you're absolutely right. We live in a country where, there hasn't been inflation. This is the first time we're seeing inflation this year. And that's not due to BOJ policies. That's due to other global economic factors. But I think what Japan has, its strength, is its very strong service industry. One of the beauties of, I think, Japanese economy and Japanese service is that we don't charge for our service. In the rest of the world, that kind of soft luxury is, presented to you at a cost. And I think it's something, Japanese people, we probably don't feel comfortable with. But, anywhere you go in Japan, you get top-notch service, and that's for free. Anywhere you go in Japan, you get safety, and that's for free. You get friendliness, and that's for free. You get convenience, and that's for free. And I think there's a lot of potential there. I think, this is something we have to offer to the world. And everyone else is monetizing it, so maybe we should be more proud of that and recognize it as something that is of value globally as well. So that's one. I think another is really looking at income. Right? As you said, a lot of our incomes have not increased. And especially for Japanese youth, Japanese millennials, Japanese Gen Z, we live in a very, very difficult economic time. I think looking at how to raise Japanese incomes and Japanese disposable income, whether through government subsidies or other incentives, I think would be the key to making sure that we have better purchasing power. And through that, perhaps increasing our inflation, hopefully, for the first time in a few decades.
It's good. So good. Now you can. I did last year. I did a series that's called "Capitalism That Works." Right. That actually sort of lays out that actually the system here, works remarkably well. Right. And we can get to that. I think that the interesting thing is about Japan is that the lowest level of services, right? And whether it's government services, whether it's healthcare services, whether it's educational services, the lowest level here is unbelievably high. I mean, you can do an experiment. Sometimes when CEOs come to Japan and I spend time with them, right? I pose them a challenge, right? I mean, Tokyo has 263 Michelin stars, right? Paris, sorry, I'm German, so I'm allowed to say snooty Paris, right, has basically 130, right? So it's quite remarkable. This is the culinary capital of the world. There's absolutely no question about that, right? Now, getting first-class service in a first-class restaurant, fine. I mean, even United Airlines, if I fly first class, it's perfectly fine, right? But the trick is economy. So pose yourself a challenge. Take a 1,000 yen note right? So that's what? That's basically $9, $9. Eat for $9. And here you will eat really well for $9. In New York, in Los Angeles, eating for $9, God, you better find a 7-Eleven, right? And go to a 7-Eleven here, as opposed to a 7-Eleven in the United States. Do you know that they change their inventory 3 times a day? If you go in the morning, there's different stuff on the shelf than there in the afternoon than in the evenings, right? Incredible, in that small space, how do they do that, right? Quite incredible, the amount of service, you know, that actually is being provided. On a serious note, right, you know, you mentioned sort of Japan's image in the world. Japan actually, particularly here in Asia, has been, you know, the big leader of multilateralism, right? While the United States basically has gone very unilateral, obviously with Mr. Trump, you know, but Mr. Biden is not that different, right? But, you know, urging, you know, the cohesiveness amongst the Trans-Pacific Partnership in terms of having a multilateral free trade agreement, you know, within Asia-Pacific. Japan has been a big leader. The Quad initiative, which is arguably the biggest initiative that has been taken over the last decade, right, you know, comes from Japan, basically looking at, you know, Japan, India, the United States, and Australia, uniting them, right, you know, I was going to say against the People's Republic of China, but I mean, but that's effectively what it is, right? But creating these allies, again, Japan has been the big coordinator, you know, of all of that. Japan also has spectacularly cool regulation. I don't know, some of you may dabble in cryptocurrencies, right? Do you know that FTX, the thing that just went bust? Japan is the only FTX, the Japan regulated FTX, where all the assets are fully reserved. Nobody's losing any money here. There's no, you can't do fraud here, right? Because it's actually a properly regulated. Now, it's not the Wild West, and so the libertarians don't like Japan, right? But in terms of actually servicing the consumer, Japan has actually been doing a very, very good job. And in that respect, you know, even in terms of, in my personal opinion, you know, in terms of rules and regulation, you know, Japan is very good. I can give you an example. When I was working for JP Morgan, you know, even Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, had to admit that Japan is the best financial regulator in the world. Because it actually, we had a financial crisis here in 1995, and they actually changed the regulatory framework. Right? They actually created a unified regulator for financial services, the FSA. Right? In the United States, massive banking crisis after the Lehman shock, right, after the global financial crisis, not a single change in the institutional or regulatory framework that we have. And so as a result of that, at JP Morgan, every single day on average, there's more than 50 different regulators in our building. And we love it. Because we can hire another lawyer. That's easy. Arbitraging one regulator against the other one, we can do. But try do that as a small startup, right? So from that perspective, you know, there are actually some very good highlights, you know, that Japan can actually be a model in terms of actually getting things done. The other argument is always there, oh, remember, Michael Porter, right? Ah, Japan hasn't invented anything since the Sony Walkman. So you guys don't even know what the Sony Walkman is, right? Sorry. No, but, you know, I mean, that was obviously the big sexy thing. It's like, oh my God, you know, what do? The last invention was the fax machine? I mean, really? You know, not true. Look at the stuff that's not sexy, right? Sumitomo Rubber, just 4 months ago, developed a new rubber compound, right? If you make a tire out of that rubber compound, your energy efficiency goes up by between 15 and 18%. It's huge, and it doesn't matter whether you've got a combustion engine or whether you've got an electric vehicle, right? Nippon Paint just developed a new paint. If you use that on a container ship, right, again, the energy efficiency and with that, the CO2 efficiency, the environmental impact, actually improves by about 12%. This is not going to make Time Magazine or Wall Street Journal headlines, right? But this Kaizen, step-by-step improvement, Japan is absolutely fantastic at. Step-by-step improvement. It gets better all the time. Want to open it up for questions from the audience? Please, anything. Hi, Dozo. Would you mind just saying, since we don't know you, just very quickly, your name and where you're from, what you do?
Sure. My name's Matt. I'm from the U.S., working in Myanmar. So I just kind of want to maybe question the comment, and I know this was not where you were going, but that sort of wealth creation is the goal, right? We've been very good in the U.S. at wealth creation, but as far as how that impacts quality of life, how it impacts opportunities for people in the middle, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that that is the growth model that is aspirational for everyone. And so I'm just curious about, from your perspective, right, does Japan offer potentially a different model that actually others in the region may find to be more attractive than just this sort of freewheeling libertarian create wealth but who actually gets it model that we see in the US?
Perfect. So the data. The top 1% of Japan own 18% of all the wealth. It's the lowest in the OECD. Yeah. In the US, basically, as you know, it's close to 60%. By the way, in the Communist People's Republic of China, the top 1% own 60% of all the wealth. If you look at Gini coefficients, the gap between income, rich and poor, if you look at asset distribution, China and America are very, very, very similar, right? Yet they're completely different systems, right? So, in my personal opinion, right, Japan is actually a model that actually works very well. How is this achieved? It is achieved with the fact that taxes are actually being collected, right? Particularly at the corporate level, particularly at the wealth level. There's no carried interest benefit that you have here in Japan, for example, which is where a lot of the incremental wealth creation in the United States has actually been coming from. Japan also doesn't socialize risk and privatize profits. I mean, I'm not going to get into this argument about Operation Warp Speed, but, Operation Warp Speed created 8 billionaires in Moderna alone. In Japan, that's impossible, because the intellectual property does not go to one person, right? The intellectual property and the benefits from that will always be socialized. So from that perspective, I find it very interesting, that, when you look at the gap between the rich and the poor, you got to ask yourself, how come that the rich got so rich, right? What are the public policy incentives, the public policy rules and regulations that are actually being put in place, right? I give you another example. Japan enforces the law, right? Carlos Ghosn, right? I mean, Carlos Ghosn, he was a friend of mine, one of the great operational leaders of my generation. There's no question. You take a third-rate Japanese car company, you merge it with a socialist French company, and you turn it into one of the #1 companies in the world. I mean, wow, you're really good, right? What happened, however, is that he got very greedy, right? He started to cheat on his taxes. And when that happens, the Japanese get very angry. And they actually do enforce the law. Anyway, sorry, just to because it's always, the problem I often face is, like, Japan is such a model economy, in my personal opinion, right? But the question is, but it can only work in Japan. It cannot work anywhere else. To which the correct answer is that's not true. Because Japan actually does apply the laws, and everybody is equal before the law. While in a lot of other countries, to use a big word, they've become plutocracies, right? Where the better lawyer will get you free, right? Sorry, this is a long, complicated discussion, right? But what is your opinion on this?
No, I agree. Surprisingly,
Your policy speeches.
Please. No, but I agree 100%. Yeah.
Hello?
I'm going to give us a restaurant recommendation in San Francisco.
I do actually. Anybody, this is, when you come next time to Silicon Valley, I know the best restaurants and Asian cuisines, right? So come to me. I'm Chuck.
In-N-Out Burger?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm Chuck. I Asia 21, 2000, class of 2008. I'm also an investor out of Silicon Valley, and actually, I really love. I mean, by the way, I rooted for having our event here. So even though actually, and I bought my ticket a week ago because I have to live up to what I promised. How we have to do an event here, so I show up. But my question, actually, my comment, and I think I love Japan. I think Japan has done many things right, and certainly I think it's the stability, the safety, a lot of these issues. So you've done it right. One thing that Japan can really do a better job, and this is something that Silicon Valley does a better job, is in the area of innovation and entrepreneurship. And I understand that, and as a young politician yourself, this is certainly something that you, and I'm glad that you're actually going to Stanford, and I'm sure we have many friends. And I think one thing that I think that you should look into is this, because I look in my personal experience in the last year, 5 of my friends have become billionaires. But you look at that, 4 of them are all foreigners. 1 grew up in the US. So my question, and this is something you need to think about, which is in the case of Japan, and also really sort of like, how do you encourage like more of these innovative people coming to Japan? And also, additionally, right, I think part of this, the sacrifices of stability, like Kadaren or these big corporations, is very structure. There's no ways for innovation. So how do you also encourage while you still have stability of that? So anyways, my comment or my thought or my question is, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
No, I agree. I think innovation entrepreneurship is one area where we really need to work on. But when you look at the history of Japanese corporate innovation, Japan actually is a country made of entrepreneurship. The biggest corporations in Japan today were once innovative companies made by young people. Panasonic is one of them, right? Sony, another. All of these big companies that we think of now today as, the sort of Japanese traditional companies, those all started with entrepreneurship and innovation. So I think we have to take a strong look at where did it stop? How did we get here? And why aren't we creating more Sonys and Panasonics in this day and age? And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we are still dependent on lifetime employment here. And once you enter a company, the company takes care of you, and you retire within that company. And when you leave a structure like that, it takes a lot of courage and you take a lot of risks. And when you leave companies like that and say you create something, I think in the US there is a lot more avenues for second, third, fourth, fifth careers, right? You create something, you try to create a company, doesn't work, create another one. Doesn't work, create another one, right? But here, I think it's, you leave a big company, you create a company, if it doesn't work, and then what? There is less, I think, investments that are focused on entrepreneurs that fail, right? And I think we struggle in giving people second chances here. And so I think it's about creating a culture of second chances, second careers, not having an economy that is dependent on lifetime employment, but something that is more of a mix of both, right? For folks who want to, because the lifetime employment system is great. As someone who entered the BOJ during the financial crisis, I was like, this is great. I can be here for life. I'll never be fired, and they'll teach me, and I'll be promoted, and my career is sort of set, right? And I think that's one option for folks to have. But I think another is, like you said, a lot more incentives, again, for innovation, entrepreneurship, both for people who want to do that, and also for second careers and second chances for those who have, bravely challenged themselves and want to move forward from their challenge.
So, God, we can have a long discussion on this. First, some facts. I've done a lot of work on this. And, you can basically show that for every 1 percentage point increase in entrepreneurs, your potential economic growth rate goes up by about 0.5 percentage point. In fact, it's the only consistent explainer of where economic growth comes from. It's not fiscal policy, it's not monetary policy, it's actually entrepreneurship, right? So that's the first element that you have there, right? The second element, is the reality of Japan. You are visiting a country, this, you're visiting a country where 1 in 4 people is over the age of 70. I mean, this is Tokyo, right? Everybody, all the young people come here. Go to the countryside. They are old. It just is a reality. Is it good or is it bad? I don't know, right? I always get the pushback. How can you be optimistic? How can you be bullish on Japan when in 311 years only 9 Japanese are going to be left, right? That's sort of the But like, look, there was a big headline. There was an article in the New York Times, right, 6 years ago. It was like, oh my God, first time in the history of mankind, Japan, the first country that sells more adult diapers than baby diapers. Isn't that terrible? Well, I went to visit Uniqlo, right? Not Uniqlo, I'm sorry, Unicharm, which is the biggest diaper company here. They love it. You know why? The profit margin on an adult diaper is exactly 2.8 times of a baby diaper. Because with a baby diaper, you literally don't give a shh, right? With an adult diaper, boy, I deserve the premium model because it fits, right? So, so there's like, is this a high growth economy? No, it isn't, right? But is this an economy where there are a lot of needs, for people, right? Where there is a lot of room for innovation. And this is a problem where the American model comes in, right? I do a lot of work in fintech, right? And the real fintech challenge here is not to convince a 22-year-old Japanese to use a mobile payment app, right? The real problem here is to get somebody who has never used a smartphone, right, to actually, use digital for people who are over 70. How does that work? Right? If you're over 70, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of getting, some form of Alzheimer type, disease, right? How does that work? The biggest challenge for Japanese banks, for example, is not the young kids and their cash transaction. The biggest challenge is the old people who don't remember which bank they bank with, never mind their PIN code. So can you create, a technology around that? That's where there's a huge opportunity that you actually have, right? The final point, just for you guys who are in the entrepreneurial business, the tolerance for failure here is very low, right? When you fail, you're out, right? It's a national embarrassment, right? But there's also economics behind it, which is that it is impossible basically for a young entrepreneur, for a startup entrepreneur, to get a bank loan that isn't collateralized by his or his wife's house or life insurance policy, etc. So when you do go bust, which the majority of startups do, right, you're actually bankrupt. Right? So that's something where actually in the here and now, the current administration is actually starting to change the system and wants to introduce banking that actually, lends on cash flow projections rather than on collateral, right? Japan is over collateralized, as far as the banking system, here is concerned. So that, I think, just puts things a little bit in perspective. But then, if you look at the number of IPOs, right? If you look at the actual innovation that is going on, right? In some of the frontier technologies, quantum computing, right? Japan is in the top, league of contenders. And trust me, a quantum computer built by Toshiba or Hitachi will actually work. While the other stuff is just a nice press meeting, right, where when you actually look behind it, nothing really works, right? So there is actually a lot of innovation that actually goes through. And then the final point, sorry for 30 seconds. Remember I talked about the minimum standard here being very high, right? I mean, the healthcare service is spectacular. Nobody here has to worry about going bankrupt because of a medical issue. This is the way the system is set up, right? But what you do find is that the Japanese government, does not tolerate failure. There's been no bankruptcy in Japan for the last 8 years. Think about that. Not a single bankruptcy. 12% of Japanese companies, right, cannot cover their interest expense, and remember, interest rates are zero, cannot cover their interest expense out of current profits. They are supported by the Japanese government. And when you look at the data, the problem is not entrepreneurship. Corporate formation is actually quite vivid here, right? The problem is there's no exit. And if there's no exit, if there's no failure, the entrepreneurs with better technology, the entrepreneurs, with better human capital management, actually cannot make inroads. So it's interesting, right? Japan's lack of tolerance for failure at the end of the day, right, is, in my personal opinion, one of the biggest obstacles that you actually have. Please.
Thanks for the panels. Really appreciate your insights on Japan and society. Rob Lee, class of 22, from New York. I run an investment firm, and we occasionally come to Japan looking for investment opportunities. And I think this one major issue that frustrates us and a lot of our peers from the United States is the corporate governance issue in the Japanese businesses. And this is less about, like outright frauds, such as FTX or Theranos that we have in the United States. It's more about capital allocation. As you said, right, the banking sector is over-collateralized. And if you look at Japanese businesses, they're just like have way too much cash sitting on the balance sheet. And they don't really pay it out, share buyback or dividend. Right, they always have very nice arguments. Oh, we went through 98, 97, 98, 7, 98. We want to preserve more cash just in case something happens. And a lot of American firms came here, tried to push for change, never succeeded, right? Now, the National Pension Service, I think what you call NPS, has a lot of holdings in these major corporations. It doesn't seem to me they're doing a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of cross-shareholding between the biggest companies in Japan. They're not really doing a lot. So I'm just curious from both a business community perspective and also from a government perspective, what are the stuff like Japan's doing to address that issue?
So fascinating, right? And just to give you some data, right? If you look at cash on listed companies' balance sheet, and remember, the listed guys are the greedy guys, right? Cash on listed companies' balance sheets in Japan 15 years ago was about 40% of GDP. Today, it is 140% of GDP. So over the last 15 years, just cash on balance sheet, despite the fact that the return on cash is zero because of zero interest rates, right, has gone up by 1 times GDP, right? In the US, we've also seen a lot of hoarding of cash, right? But in the US, it went up from about 21% of GDP to about 35% of GDP. I mean, Apple has a lot of cash, right? So you're absolutely right in terms of, they have Japan has very, very lazy balance sheets, right? But do they use these balance sheets? When President Biden in the summer passed, what is that thing called? The Inflation Reduction Act, right? Which is a misnomer, but it's actually a really, really important industrial policy in America, right? With a lot of environmental focus that is built in there. It's a huge industrial, very, very coordinated industrial policy. Within 23 hours of that bill making it through American Congress, Toyota, Honda, Panasonic, Keyence announced what comes to about $23 billion of new factories that are going to be built in the United States of America. So the point I'm trying to say is that the argument that I've built a war chest, right, and I'm going to use this war chest when I'm required to do so, Japan is actually very nimble, and Japan does actually take action. You and I as investors will always argue, we need a higher dividend. We need, higher share buybacks. That's our job as investors. But I think, the verdict is still out. And in my personal opinion, what you are going to see, if and when the United States falls into a recession next year, you will find there will be a boom of inward investment from Japan buying US companies, right? But that's just, my prediction. Hi, please.
Hi, I'm Tao. I'm a tech entrepreneur from Berlin, Germany. We have a Japanese investor, so if we're successful, hopefully Japan benefits a little bit. So my question is motivated from a German perspective, and this is not a question about football. So as you're well aware, so the German business model is creaking. Dependence on China, dependence on cars, chemicals, and Germany right now is probably very much in a situation looking for a new model that works. And I think your explanation on the Japanese model was particularly interesting. And so, however, I was very struck by this data point you mentioned of stagnating disposable income. So my question there was, is that, or multiple questions there, is that an inevitable trade-off of the Japanese system? Is it an inevitable function of demographics? Are there remedies? And what are learnings for Europe?
Yeah. So sorry, I'm going.
I'm learning so much.
No, but this is actually cool. So why have income stagnated? You know, demography actually explains about 85% of that. And what you have is you've got the Mick Jagger generation, right? So you've got the baby boom generation, yeah, that moved into retirement. Now, you should all be aware, I mean, it's true for the US, it's true for Germany, it's true for Japan. Your peak income in life typically is around 55 years old. After that, you're going down, right? You know, you leave the big company job, you go to a small company, right? Typically, that in the Japanese case, right, gives you a drawdown, you know, of about 30% less, you know, sort of disposable income, right? So that's a big part here. And as the baby boom generation, which is very large in Japan, 21% of the population, as they, over the last 20 years, moved down from their 55-year-old peak, right, you've had a huge drag on disposable income, right? The pension replacement rate here is actually very low, right? So of the past 5 years of your income, right, in the US for a typical pension, right, you get about 50%. So if you made 100 over the last 5 years of your employment, you actually get about 50, right, once you move on to pension. In Japan, you get 38, right? And they've actually been cutting the pension benefits quite significant. So that drag has actually been accelerated, right, by more and more tighter policy, right? So that's the bad end in terms of the, you know, the drag on disposable income, right? The front end, so the younger generation, is actually now, in my opinion, in a demographic sweet spot. What do I mean by that? Because the young, I mean, I don't know, when was this? Before you were born. 8 years ago, I gave a TED talk, and the first line.
That's not before I was born. A little older than that.
You look so young. No, but so again, 8 years ago, I gave a TED talk. The first line was, "I want to be reborn as a 23-year-old Japanese." Right? And the reason is very simple. The number of high school and university graduates here is shrinking. Right? Every year it goes down by about 25,000 kids. Right? So as a result of that, the balance of power in the labor market is actually changing towards the young. Right? And you actually do find, empirically, you can show, right, that more and more Japanese companies are now hiring what used to be geek employees, that used to be freelance, that used to be part-time workers. They're now rehiring them on a full-time basis. And that actually starts to have very, very positive impact on the overall economy. I actually think that Japan will be the only G7 economy where we're going to see the creation of a new middle class. You know, the old guys here, Mick Jagger, this is sayonara, right? But this here is obviously a smaller cohort, right? 21% of the population here, you've got about 14%, right? But their life is actually improving very, very nicely. And this is very cool. This is very cool. Fun fact. Do you know that Tokyo is the only major city in the world where, God forbid, if you work at a Starbucks and you work the average hours, you can actually afford to buy an apartment within a 1 hour commute. Oh. Try doing that in your city.
Oh, I'm moving to.
No, but you know, so you know, the fact that I did have this stagnation, right, actually creates opportunities for the younger generation. I still have to deal with these, right, with me, right, you know, but that will take care. And by the way, because of death of the baby boom generation, in the next decade, the equivalent of 1.5 times of GDP of financial assets will be transferred. Now, they will be taxed, right, by about 50%, but that's still 0.7 times of GDP that's actually going to be coming through. So from that perspective, it's actually a really, really exciting time to be a young Japanese, because the power is with you, right? All of a sudden, Mitsubishi Corporation, which used to be the boss, right? All of a sudden, Mitsubishi Corporation, if you are a graduate of a university, all of a sudden you can say, well, what about life-work balance? You don't know, these are issues. What about parental leave, right? Which was never, nobody had the power to actually do that. Now the economics of the demographics, right, actually have flipped the coin, right? And it's quite interesting. It's potentially actually quite dangerous. My wife is on the board of one of the big public hospitals here. In the last 3 months, they've had 11 nurses leave Japan to work in Australia because the yen's very weak, right? They are very, very well trained, right? And they can basically treble their income by working in Australia. So this potential for brain drain, right? Unless you begin to empower, the young generation, right? That I think is still there, right? Sorry, I didn't answer your question. As you know, I'm from Germany originally. I'm crying today, because it's, I think, a sign of the time that Japan makes it and Germany gets kicked out. But it actually, according to my friends, it just proves that Germany should learn from Italy. Because Italy, as you know, has not participated in the World Cup for the last 2 times, and it's better not to participate, right, than to leave disgracefully. Hi, please.
Hello, Kanai Doe, Japan Director of Human Rights Watch. I'm from Tokyo. Of course, I'm encouraged by you talking about Japan. Human rights, democracy is top priority for your campaign. So, 2 questions. One is, what's your kind of possible scenario where people in Asia, the dignity, human rights are respected? Hopefully in the next 1 or 2 decades. What's your strategy and scenario, possible scenario? Second is, I'm struggling always to encourage the foreign ministry, the Japanese diplomats, to speak out on human rights. It seems that they, it is true that they have good relationships with Myanmar, Iran. These are very exceptional, and then of course there is a real unique opportunity for them to use. However, they think that they're raising human rights issue is a trade-off, with their friendly relationship with those governments, and then so it is really really hard to make them stand up. So what's your plan to change the mindset of Japanese diplomats and reform the foreign ministry? Thank you.
No, thank you. Those are excellent questions. And Doi-san, I've always admired your work, so it's an honor. No, absolutely. But one, I think we have best case scenario and worst case scenario impending upon us in Asia. I think best case scenario, of course, is we move towards the next phase in discussions on human rights where, we in Asia collectively recognize that human rights is a universal value. It is a birthright that we all have. And standing up for human rights in countries outside of ours is not interfering in other people's internal affairs, but it is really standing up for universal rights that we all deserve. I hope that we, Japan included, our countries start to recognize that when we don't stand up for human rights in other countries in Asia, we also risk weakening human rights within our own countries. All of these things are so connected. And as a former UN official, of course, I have to refer back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document is for everybody, regardless of where you were born, what country you are from. We all have shared rights. And I really do hope that we move towards an era where, talking about human rights is not taboo. Rather, it is seen as a humanitarian sort of right, as opposed to a political one. Worst case, I think, within the context of current global situation, I do fear for human rights all over the world, and especially in Asia. We are seeing, throughout Asia, and frankly, including in Japan, truly shrinking space for human rights defenders, for human rights, for civil rights. I really think that the only way to come out of it is for those within power, those with privilege, to recognize that if we don't speak now, we go toward a downward spiral for everyone. I don't have a very optimistic, honestly, view, but I do hope that we, as within our generation and as leaders here, we take it as our own homework to stand up for human rights wherever we see violations. Second, on diplomacy, great point. I think what I've always tried to encourage Japanese diplomats and my counterparts to do, and also what I do feel in terms of Japanese diplomacy, is that we have to, I think, recognize the power of Japanese relations with these countries that I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but that other Western democracies don't have. It is actually a tool within our diplomatic toolbox, I think, that we have friendly relations with these countries. And as a result, Japan would be so much more capable of conducting peacemaking, bridge building, silent diplomacy with these countries. Japan does stand in a different place. Having come from the UN too, I definitely recognize that it's not always a loudspeaker diplomacy or loudspeaker activism for human rights that has power. Japan stands in a very unique position where we can sit down with Iranian authorities, we can sit down with authorities in Myanmar and discuss issues and have entry points to issues in ways that other countries might not have. I hope that our diplomatic corps recognize that that is a tool and that is a power, and there is a way to do both. There is a way to be friendly with these countries, and also to, because they're our friends, also I think there's a door that we have to have these discussions and say, well, in Japan we believe in these values, and how can we help in terms of these issues that we have.
Well, apparently, the people in the back are flashing cards at me very wildly. Apparently, it's time for a break. We hope we've given you a little bit of food for thought, a little bit of inspiration, and I really do hope that you will continue to fight the good fight. You certainly don't seem encouraged. You seem more fired up. And anything that Asia Society, can do, in particular this group of future leaders, right? Please, you've got an extremely powerful network, right? You can get things done. You do not take no for an answer. You stand for your rights. You stand for your ideas. That's what we need, from the young generation. And sometimes you have to throw bricks. So be it. But this, what the Japanese call challenge seishin, so the challenging spirit, is absolutely key. I want to thank you very much, and hope to see you at some of the other events. Enjoy your sessions, and don't forget, Tokyo does have some of the best nightclubs and bars in the world. See you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.